Hello, everyone, and welcome to our live recording of the Discover Ag podcast, where food meets pop culture. We're your hosts, Natalie and Tara. We are millennial cattle rancher and dairy farmer, and every Thursday we go beyond the headlines to discover what's new in the world of food. And we are so excited to be coming to you guys today. Just this week, we have been in the top 10 ranked for food podcasts in the United States. And that is such a big milestone for us to be in that top 10, because it is thanks to all of you who are here live, our discos, and our listeners that tune in every single week to our Thursday episodes. And even more exciting, we are so happy to be back here at American Farm Bureau celebrating the new frontiers and what is on the horizon for agriculture. Just a year ago, we were on stage in Puerto Rico coming with our first live show, and it feels so good to be back again. So one of the things that I am personally excited about for this topic, this theme of New Frontiers, is in a lot of Q&As and panels that I'm on, I get asked about the future of agriculture and what I see for all of us in the next few decades. And as a millennial female in agriculture, and especially as a mom of two young children, the future of agriculture really weighs heavy on my mind. I was on a panel, one of those Q&As, and I got asked, what would I need to see happen in the agriculture industry and in the dairy industry, because I'm a dairy farmer, for me to be excited about my girls joining the industry. And so it made me really stop and think so far beyond just our upfront, like new horizons, but beyond that. What does it look like for ag in 30 years? And thinking 30 years into the future, that puts my girls at the same age I am now. And it honestly makes me so excited for what we have coming in agriculture. And I think it is truly post-COVID, we are in this pivotal moment for agriculture, where consumers care more than ever before about where their food comes from, and yet they are more removed than ever before from agriculture. And that's why I really believe in this theme of new frontiers for this moment in time.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I was actually at a conference a couple months ago. I was down in Texas on the Texas Tech campus. I don't know if we have any red, do we randomly have a Red Raider fan in the crowd? Okay, we'll need to talk to Texas Farm.
Guns up!
Okay, yay! But one of the fellow producers on the panel with me said something that I will never forget. He said, never before in the history of agriculture have we gone this fast, and never before will we go this slow again. And I thought, isn't that a soundbite for where we are in agriculture right now? It just really resonated with me. And so I think just to applaud American Farm Bureau one more time for this really, truly perfect theme, the New Frontiers, for this convention. So a little bit about us. As Tara mentioned, she's a dairy farmer from New Mexico, and I am a cattle rancher from Nebraska, and we have the Discover Ag podcast. Do we have any discos in the crowd that listen to the, okay, yay.
Yay!
So you guys are familiar with our podcast, but for everyone who isn't, I'll give you guys a little bit of a backstory about who we are and what we cover every single week. So Tara and I had been sharing online for a couple years separately, kind of individually, and about 2 years ago we started to notice a trend, and something I'd be curious to know if you guys noticed as well. But what we noticed was, as Tara mentioned, coming out of that kind of COVID period, there were more food and farming conversations taking place. But a lot of those food and farming conversations were taking place by people who are outside of the ag industry. They were really the ones kind of dominating what was being said and what was being talked about. And what stood out to me is we had people like wellness influencers and doctors and food influencers. And not that they can't talk about food and farming and production agriculture, but sometimes I just started to notice that they crossed the line into understanding and like what they were talking about. And so it just really stood out to me that we were having this domination about food and farming conversations, but not by actual food farmers.
Yeah, it's funny, even looking at, I mentioned the Apple podcast charts, and then we're in the top 10 for food. Well, one of the reasons that we ended up in that food bucket is because there isn't a chart for agriculture. There isn't a chart for farming. And so it's kind of like, well, where do we end up? Where do we put ourselves? And so we ended up in that food podcast bucket. And when you look at that list of who's on that chart and who is in that category, there is not any farmers or ranchers on there. It's chefs, it's food influencers, it's those foodies of the world. And it is absolutely what's dominating the conversation.
And the problem with that is it's all taking place on social media, right? So you're having, catchy sound bites and clickbait titles and really like short form conversations, right? Like how much can you fit into a 10-second reel, a 15-second reel? And so Tara and I thought, gosh, why isn't there a space where we can have more of this nuanced conversation about things that are going on in the food space? And so that was really the birth of our podcast, Discover Ag. And that is our mission. It is to go beyond the headlines and to really talk about articles. So every Thursday we break down 3 trending topics in the ag and food space, and we really talk about it from, like a female millennial perspective. And while that's what we do, we also, we focus on food and agriculture and topics that are important to us within the industry. Like recently we covered Colorado wolves, what's going on across seas with like EU and farmer protests and, Ireland having to cull cattle, like really important issues that affect our industry. We also like to kind of spice it up and talk about things that you wouldn't maybe normally associate with agriculture when it comes to the food space. Like we've talked about Taylor Swift. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she, grew up on a tree farm, and so we'll talk about that. Mark Zuckerberg is starting a ranch in Hawaii, and so some of these conversations that we can kind of put a twist to and talk about in like a more millennial female way when it comes to agriculture. And so today for the topics, we wanted to do the same thing. We wanted to talk about 3 things that was really important to American Farm Bureau, but kind of pick some articles that were maybe a little bit more unique. So we're going to be talking about mental health. We're going to be talking about gene editing, and then we're also going to be talking about the Farm Bill. And I will say that the second article is by far my favorite article, so make sure you at least stick around for that one.
I mean, I'm going to give a plug for the last one. I actually really like the gene editing one, so don't leave. Stay the whole time. So if you've listened to our podcast before, you know it's normally just Natalie and I behind our mics in our podcast studios in New Mexico and Nebraska. But covering, all of the articles, the topics that Natalie just mentioned. But today, we find ourselves in front of a live audience, and so don't leave after I say this, but we're going to be bringing you guys into the conversations. We want to get all of our discos involved in this, get your opinions, your thoughts, your feedbacks on the articles that we are covering. So if you are walking around the trade show right now, come over to the Cultivating stage and tune in, jump into this conversation with us, because we do want to get your guys' thoughts and feedback. There will also be a time at the end for a general Q&A, so any questions that you may have that don't come up during the articles, or maybe at the end you've thought of something you want to bring up, we hope you will ask those questions at the end. So there's lots to cover here.
You guys will see we have a mic runner coming around, so don't run away from her. You actually want to come towards the mic runner, speak into the mic. But ready to get discovering?
Let's discover.
Okay, so diving into our first article to discover today, title, Our Best Farming and Farm Bill Reporting of 2023. So this was an article that was actually written by Civil Eats, and I would actually call it less of an article, and I would call it more of a review. Because what it did is it linked to 16 different Farm Bill related articles that Civil Eats covered throughout the year 2023. They covered everything from farm threats to farmers and farm workers to solutions when it comes to climate change, just different things that farmers are battling. And when it stood out to me, when I scrolled and looked at those different 16 articles that Civil Eats covered, there was one thing that really stood out to me right away. And it was how diverse the different things those articles were talking about. And I thought, gosh, if that doesn't speak to how diverse the Farm Bill is, I don't know what does. I think it really highlighted how important the Farm Bill is, because it touches on so many different aspects when it comes to agriculture.
One of the things Natalie didn't mention about the articles we pick is you'll find that a lot of times our articles do not come from traditional like ag news sources. Civil Eats is one we like to kind of pick on a lot. It is not always favorable to agriculture, so it's always interesting to read, what are they covering? What's standing out to them? And the Farm Bill was no different. As Natalie said, they covered a wide range of topics. And I actually have a quote from President Zippy Duvall I want to share, and it is that the Farm Bill is one of the mightiest tools to protect our nation's food supply and to strengthen agriculture. And he is absolutely right. The Farm Bill is this huge, massive bill that covers a vast amount of topics, from food to farming. We see there are different pieces of the Farm Bill coming from both sides of the aisle, whether it be people, our Republican representatives that care about certain topics, or our Democratic representatives that do. It even crosses the rural-urban divide, which we know is such a key piece of the Farm Bill. It is truly a bill that touches everyone's lives, and everyone has what they want to say about it, or what they want changed, or what they want put into it. It is everywhere, touching our lives. I think, though, as that I am looking at this article, and even as I was going through other articles that were out there on the internet, I was looking at American Farm Bureau's website, I saw that over and over there was just different topics that people cared about on different passion levels. So in this Civil Eats one, there was actually a conversation around PFAS remediation. That is something that is like very important to me and my area. We actually are in a county where there is a huge PFAS contamination. It has actually put one of our dairy farmers out of business because of how bad it is. I'm gonna guess though, my co-host, like PFAS remediation may not be high on your list of priorities.
No, I would definitely put real estate taxes. Like taxes in Nebraska would be higher than PFAS in Nebraska.
I would guess our Texas people might also feel that. So we're gonna have different conversations about what's important to us in our area, our county, our state, our region. And I think that's why it's so important for an organization like American Farm Bureau to really be a piece of this, is because they have representatives from every state that can really bring the conversation to American Farm Bureau, saying, here's what is important to our constituents, here's what is important to our members. And so that really makes me wonder, here it comes, guys, this is your guys' first question, mic runners ready. What do you guys care about the Farm Bill? What is big in your area? What topics are you absolutely wanting to see included in this 2024 Farm Bill and beyond?
And while you're thinking of your answer, I do want to point out that before we got on stage, Tara said it made most sense for her to run the clicker. Like she would do a better job at moving the slides along than I would. And I have had to move our slides along. Did we catch twice now? 2 out of the 3 times I've had to take over the slides.
Maybe I should put it in the middle. All right, question.
So one of the issues that we deal with, and we have been dealing with for 25 years in Arizona and New Mexico, is the Mexican gray wolf. This year we have the Wolf Act, which is set to be in the 2024 Farm Bill. That's one of the issues that we're really passionate about. The Wolf Act would compensate ranchers fairly, not just for depredations, but for all losses associated with the wolves. There's the cost of moving cattle from pasture to pasture, the cost of decreased conception rates, the cost of decreased weaning weights, the cost of added labor, the cost of hay. Now, all of those things need to be reimbursed, and they haven't been for 25 years. I know a ranch in Arizona that has lost over 1,000 calves. They've lost over $1 million. They've received $5,000 in compensation for the wolf. And so this is one of the things that we're really passionate about from Arizona and New Mexico.
Yeah, and what's so crazy about that topic, I mean, that's obviously, Natalie mentioned like the wolves being reintroduced into Colorado as well. And I think this is something we're gonna see more and more states being very passionate about. I know when we covered that topic on the podcast, we heard from our discos in Oregon, in Wyoming, in Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and it's impacting them all so differently, but yet at the core it is like the same very like principle of the fact of like how are we compensating ranchers who are losing livestock, who it is absolutely affecting their bottom line and their operation.
Yeah, and I think that's also a really interesting topic too, because you know you talked about it from like the state Arizona, but when we covered it on the podcast and we were talking about Colorado wolves, it's like all the neighboring states that border that, like they're just as concerned too, right? Like we don't know how far that wolf is like roaming and what goes on with that. So it's also something that I think can like kind of unify states together a little bit if you're like kind of, you know, surrounding each other. Anyone else who has something, you know, from their state that's important to them when it comes to the Farm Bill? Thank you very much.
Yeah,
You're
thank you.
Brave disco.
Brave first
Yes.
one. Any other comments? Who has some hot topics in their state that they are looking to get covered in the Farm Bill? I feel like here in Utah, we've seen a lot of conversations about water use. I think, again, that's probably a Western state thing that we're seeing over and over again. So it really comes down to those regional differences of what's going to matter for you in the Farm Bill.
Yeah, and I think if no one does, anyone else burning to get in their state opinion. Otherwise,
We'll move on. We'll leave you alone for a while.
Yeah, you will be called upon again, though. So you guys can see the second question. You can start, you know, formulating a response now. Because I do want to kind of flip, I guess, the Farm Bill almost on its head, you could say, because, you know, we just asked you guys to talk about how maybe it's varying from state to state, you know, what like maybe a cattle rancher in New Mexico or Nebraska would care about, or versus, you know, a dairy farmer in New Mexico would care about, or, you know, someone here in the great state of Utah would care about. And those are all going to be different things when it comes to the Farm Bill. But I think the other really neat thing about the Farm Bill is that there are unifying things within it, right? That no matter where you are or what you do, you still care about it so passionately. And I think for Tara and I, when we were kind of going through this and like looking at the different articles they talked about, one thing that really stood out to us that, again, didn't really matter regionally where you were, you still passionately cared about it, was food security.
Yeah, when I think about food security, I think the first thing that comes to mind right now is food costs and how much prices are rising in the grocery store. I feel like right now you cannot go to the grocery store, no matter where you're at or what your background is. When you see that grocery store bill, you like take in a collective, like, you know, a little bit of panic.
Especially if you go to like a Costco, you're like,
yeah.
Actually, I'm gonna put half of this back.
Like, I'm sorry, never mind, my kid threw that into the cart, put it back in the bag. But no, I mean, but it goes so far beyond just cost and thinking about like food security for underserved communities or urban food deserts. Like, there is so much to this conversation around food security. And something that we have talked a lot about in this podcast in a lot of different ways is about food security in the way of foreign ownership. I feel like there's so many news articles constantly covering which countries are owning farmland in the United States, how much they're owning, how much they're buying, how quickly they're buying it. We're seeing conversations, I mentioned, you know, water usage. I know that's been a hot topic in Arizona that, you know, Saudi Arabia having alfalfa farms. Water usage in Utah has been huge. We've also seen things like olive oil shortages, and maybe olive oil is not a staple in your household, but when you think about such a basic product that a lot of people use and have in their pantry without even thinking about it, it being in shortage or the demand being so high that the prices are skyrocketing. Another controversial topic that we have been covering since 2022, when we actually had President Zippy Duvall on the podcast to talk about it, is Prop 12. And what that means for our pork producers across the country, as well as what it means for access to pork for those consumers in California. And so my question to you guys now is, when you think of food security, what aspects of that food security conversation in the Farm Bill are really important to you? And maybe your commodity and what you're representing here today. Oh, we have one question.
Not as much as a question, so sorry for that. My name is Kelsey Barnes. I'm originally from a corn, soybean, cow-calf operation in Tennessee, but now work on ag policy in DC. And when I think about food security, there's a lot of domestic points that you brought up, but I'm also very concerned about global food insecurity currently. For over 20 years, we were able to reduce consecutively global food insecurity until COVID happened. Now there's well over 350 million people around the world who are going to bed hungry at night, and for comparison, that's larger than the population of the United States. Some of the biggest and largest increasing national security threats over the past, since COVID essentially, pertains to everything from trade to increases in terrorism to drug trade. And all of those consecutively have one thing in common, and that's food insecurity that drive all of them. So we're at a higher national security risk due to other countries being food insecure. So one thing when we look at the Farm Bill is the trade title, and how do we become better friends with other countries, and not just our developed friends in the Western Hemisphere, but also in the Eastern Hemisphere with continents like Africa and Asia, so that we're able to help people be able to feed themselves and then be more secure. So I think that's a concern for me as we talk a lot about the domestic side, but I'm really interested in the Farm Bill and the trade aspect of it, and those programs to really promote U.S. exports, but also creating friends with those countries.
Yeah, that is such a good contribution you added. I remember listening to a podcast, and she was living in Aruba. She was from the U.S., but they were down there living. And you know, here in the U.S. during COVID, we were worried about like toilet paper, right? And she said there was a moment when I had sheer panic. Was I actually going to be able to feed my family? Because they import so much of their food. They're food insecure, right? They rely on other people. And it was the same thing we learned when we were in Puerto Rico last year, how much Puerto Rico actually imports. And so I do think, it's such a valid point about what we can do for as you mentioned, like global exports while, while still maintaining.
Yeah, I think the global imports and exports conversation, like I don't think we can go like more than a month without that being a topic on the podcast, because it is such a crucial piece, and it's very complex and layered, like you were talking about. Like it's not very simple. And most recently, we actually talked about it in relation to importing into the United States avocados from Mexico, and what a controversial topic that has become, and the issues associated with it now being almost like a cartel-controlled avocado market. Because you have such a high demand in the United States, it can lead to a lot of issues in a developing nation and in regions where specifically avocados are being grown, that you have this huge influx of money and economics coming into the town, because we're exporting all of these avocados into the United States. And so it is, I think the import-export conversation there is just like such a fine line of like wanting to be food secure in our own nation and being providing for our nation, while also building those relationships, like you said, beyond like our borders, beyond our normal, like who we think of as imports and exports, and just like continuing that. I know within dairy, we export a lot of cheese into Mexico, but now we're looking into the South Pacific. Like, how can we have better relationships? What can we give to them in exchange for foods we want from them? And it is that give and take there in those imports and exports.
Anyone else have something they want to contribute to the food security conversation?
Thank you. That was such a great question.
Yeah, up front. Yes, you are now an official disco if you weren't before. Welcome. Welcome to the disco community. Everyone else, you are not. You are not a part of the disco community until you answer a question.
Thank you. I'm Mark McCarg from Nebraska. One of the things that I think, for me, I'm a pork producer, and you did mention Prop 12 in the conversation. And when I started thinking about how I produce the hogs in my operation, I think about that relative to food security. When we actually live in a nation right now in the United States that we can, by a vote of the people, dictate how I, as a producer, produce my hogs, even though I'm using the best technology, the latest research from our universities, yet things like Prop 12, that ruling out of California, is going to affect how I produce my animals. Now, you extrapolate that out when you think about the food system across the country. I think that's something that's going to be potentially really devastating, potentially how we produce and our ability to produce food. So going back to the Farm Bill, I think we do have to have a discussion, a pretty serious discussion, on whether we actually hold up the Farm Bill to get a fix on Proposition 12.
Yeah, in my keynote speech that I give, I actually talk a lot about consumers' buying power and how when they go into the grocery store, they hold all the buying power in their wallet. And essentially, the way I think about it is every time they spend $1 on a type of food in the grocery store, they are voting for or against a farming practice. Whether they consciously or unconsciously realize that or not, they are essentially moving the needle one way or another within agriculture. I think about the non-GMO movement. So if they are only buying non-GMO products, essentially they are voting for that farming practice. And it actually reminds me of another piece of my speech I give is about my grandfather. And I always think that if he was sitting in the audience when we're having these conversations, what he would think. And I would guess that my grandfather never gave much thought as to what the consumer thought of his on-farm practices. And I don't say that to say he didn't care about what he was doing or he didn't care about his consumers. I say it as that what they thought did not change how he was doing things. He was making the best decision for his farm based on the information he had. And never before in history have we had this moment where consumers are truly dictating our on-farm practices. I mean, carrying it over to cows, like we have, we're going to probably be moving away from dehorning. Branding in New Mexico, I was on the livestock board, was a huge issue. We're still a branding state and people want that voted out. And so it is such a peculiar time to have people that know so little about farming, and yet they are truly having an impact on our farm practices.
Which I think brings up something that's kind of a little bit touchy for agriculture, but it's like, are we playing defense or are we playing offense, right? Like when it comes to these conversations with consumers, and like you'll hear a farmer say all the time, we're not price makers, we're price takers, right? Like we give a lot of power to our consumers, and sometimes I personally have to ask myself, like, why are we handing over so much power? Like, why don't we sometimes step back into that more offensive role where we're saying, like, no, we're the experts, we know what we're doing on our farms and ranches. And I actually talk about in my keynote this a lot. Like I say, consumer trust is where we need to be focusing. Like, we don't need them to understand every single thing about what we do, and sometimes that's why I'm not my like, you know, educating consumers isn't actually my favorite thing to like talk about or to phrase it that way, because I'm not so much interested in getting them to understand everything I do, but I am really, really, as a producer, getting them interested in trusting what I do. And I think that's an important piece that goes back to like consumer trust.
I'm back on my job.
Okay.
Article number 2.
Slacking. Okay, any other things before we move on? Okay, yep.
My name is Kevin Dahlman, Minnesota. Partly when I think of food security, I think of food waste, and roughly 40% of the food is wasted here in United States. Senator Blumenthal has a food date labeling act, a bill in the hopper dealing with the best by, sell by, use by dates on food. Just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so, you know, if food waste was a country, it would be the 3rd largest greenhouse gas emitter. And so, you know, my background is in environmental science, so I've come at it from kind of that sustainability lens, but it is crazy when we have so much conversation around on-farm practices and sustainability practices, when in reality, if we reduced our food waste, we could have a massive impact, not only in having people have more access to food, but we'd be lowering our greenhouse gas emissions. And so this food waste conversation, you know, you think about it as just like throwing out less food, but it is so much more complex than that. And that's something we've actually learned about in a few different conferences we've gone to is, you know, the complexities of whether you're wasting, you know, is food being wasted at the farm, which is a very small amount? Is food being wasted in the grocery store? Is it being wasted in, you know, hotels and things like where we're staying at this week? Or is it actually in the home? And I think that's why it's such a hard thing to address, is because it's not a single point, right? There's so many points along the way in the food supply system where we are having food waste.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up too, because food waste, I feel like it's kind of like, it's the most important thing, but it's like the thing that gets forgotten to get talked about a lot. It's like any mothers out there, it's like our last child, you know, it's like just kind of like waddling along behind, like trying to catch up, but it's so important that we bring food waste, that conversation, into the future, because I do think it's going to have such a huge impact if we could figure out how to scale it back. Okay, well, we will wrap up that article and we will dive into discovering the next topic. Headline: Are you okay, or have you witnessed a decade of what I eat in a day videos? So now, I said earlier this was actually my favorite article. I thought it was so fascinating to read through, and I think it's because it melded two things that Tara and I know a little bit about, which is social media and food. But what it did is it kind of melded them together in a way I've never thought of pairing them together before, and kind of almost put me behind the lens of a way I've never viewed them before.
Yeah, and you might be looking at this article and thinking, like, what does this have to do with agriculture? And one of the things Natalie and I try to do with the podcast is always pick at least one article that maybe is not ag focused, if not even 2 articles that are not ag focused. Because what we have found is, for a lot of consumers, ag does not mean anything to them, really. Food is it. That is it. Food is what is farming and agriculture to them. And so when we're trying to cross that like barrier and get outside of kind of our ag bubble with the podcast and reach those consumers, we try to pick articles like this where we can kind of bring them in. It's something they can relate to, and then we can sprinkle in a few ag facts along the way.
Yeah, and it's funny you said like not ag articles, because they still are. Like, ag is food. Food is ag. It's actually makes me think of kind of a funny, not funny story. But since starting our podcast, Tara and I have had, you know, this really unique opportunity to like guest on other people's podcasts. It's kind of like a thing. When you're a podcaster, you like go on other podcasts. And we have guested, I think we tallied it up the other day, and it was like over 50 podcasts. And I would say probably close to like 99% of them are very non-agriculture podcasts. Like, they were like in the fitness space, like the health space, like very far removed from agriculture. And I will never forget the first time we got introduced as Natalie and Tara from the Discover AG podcast. They did not correlate, not only did they not correlate ag to agriculture, but they didn't correlate ag to ag. Like, they had never heard of it before. And we had that happen multiple times. We were at Discover AG, and then, you know, halfway through the conversation, the host would be like, I am so sorry, I didn't know that ag meant agriculture, you know? And so I do think it's so important to remember that when consumers are looking at food and farming and agriculture, they are looking at food. Okay, so going back to the article, the main idea discussed how online algorithms of different social platforms are serving us what they called other people's meals in an increasingly granular detail. And what they talked about is how there are experts who are really concerned about what this means for our mental health. So like the title says, "Are you okay?" or "Have you witnessed a decade of what I eat in a day videos?" And this is totally going to show my female millennial, side here. But I could not help but think when I was reading this article of the movie Mean Girls, when she was like, "Okay, who here has been personally victimized by Regina George?" And I was like, who here has been personally victimized by internet food reels?
Not only did that show that you were a millennial, but it also shows your age, because Mean Girls is 20 years old this year. There's a new Mean Girl movie out. We probably need to get with the times.
We're not regular podcasters, we're cool podcasters.
We're cool podcasters. No, but there are so many layers to this article. Like, on the outside, I think it's very easy to dismiss and be like, seriously, like, this shouldn't be that big of a deal. Like, seeing a meal or two online should not affect your mental health. But honestly, it's so much more than that. We are being bombarded with tons of information about what people are eating, how they're eating it, how they look while they're eating it, what their house looks like while they're eating it, and then they're telling you what you should or shouldn't be eating while you're doing that. And when you think back, like, on history, generations of people before us, the only way you knew what someone was eating is if you were to go up to a stranger and ask them what they were eating. And that is a little awkward, a little unlikely. I don't think we're going to be doing that.
What'd you eat for breakfast?
How was your lunch? How'd you cut it? How'd you cut your child's sandwich? Another way would be like looking in someone's grocery cart. And again, like, that doesn't give you really a picture of what they're truly eating. Today on TikTok, the hashtag What I Eat in the Day has 19 billion with a B views. When I say bombarded, I mean we are being bombarded with what people eat. And there's actually a video that's going viral right now of a woman who, the caption says, "What I feed my 1-year-old." And she gets out a plate and she puts 3 donuts on it and cuts them up and gives it to her 1-year-old. It is going absolutely crazy on the internet right now. Food influencers are obviously shaming her. People in the comment section are shaming the influencers for shaming her. Like, it is wild out there. And there's so much conversation, there's rebuttal videos of parents being like, here's what I feed my kids because I actually care about them. So many videos. And as a mom who just yesterday actually took my kids to the donut shop and let them get a donut, and I posted it on the internet, seeing that video that morning made me think, oh my gosh, what are people gonna say that I gave my kid a donut today? I know full and well that they had a great breakfast earlier that morning with milk and eggs and fruits and all those things, and we did donuts as a special treat. But again, like, I had to stop and kind of think, what is this telling people that are following me? What are people gonna think about this? And it actually is also a part of a bigger conversation that Natalie and I are actually headed to South by Southwest in Austin, Texas in March. And for people who aren't familiar with South by Southwest, it is a massive conference with multiple festivals that celebrate the convergence of tech, film, music, education, culture, and food. And Natalie and I will be talking on the food portion of this conference. And we're gonna be discussing how is your favorite food influencer fear-mongering you? And this whole idea, this very increasingly controversial topic of people on the internet telling us what we should and shouldn't be eating. And ultimately, what it's leading to is conversations around how our food is being farmed.
So I think that brings up our first question for you guys. Do you think this regular and kind of far-reaching content, this in-depth access we have to everyone's lives now, is that good for our mental health? Because obviously there is going to be there's positives, right, of like being connected, and there's also negatives. I was actually listening to a podcast the other day. It was talking about how we as humans are not meant to take in as much information that we do now with social media. On my ranch in the middle of somewhere in Nebraska, I am not supposed to know what is going on with someone's breakfast in Australia. Do I need to know what's going on? I mean, even staying within the States, do I need to know what's going on, in someone's household in, New Hampshire? And so I think there's this conversation of what is this actually doing for our mental health? Feel free to answer this when it comes to food, like the article talked about, or if you just want to answer it in general, you have general thoughts about it, you can do that as well. Anyone? Yay!
So TikTok and Instagram has been a big influence to me since COVID, but I think that my biggest issue is we raise corn and soybeans, but also freezer beef, and we have friends that aren't in the ag realm, and the need to put, we're feeding organic chicken, or designating something as organic or non-GMO, and not understanding exactly what those terms mean. And so our pastor's wife is big about organic, but she doesn't exactly know what organic is. It's more of she's now watched this stuff on Reels or TikTok, and now that's being fed to her. And so she's not getting the whole outside aspect. It's this one thing is now being pushed to her, and so she thinks that that's the only way to go. And so I think that one true vision is really hard for me, that, you know, organic and non-GMO, I don't care what you grow, you're allowed to have your preference, but pushing the one-sided effect to our consumers is really harming ag in general as we continue to grow in the industry.
Yeah, I actually talk about this in my keynote, the same thing, that we need to have more of a unifying voice, because it really does, I mean, going back to what Tara said, it really does affect the consumers. I actually have a really good friend from California, and she, you know, calls herself ag naive, but I really do not consider her that. I mean, she grew up kind of in like rodeo western, so I would say that is like more of a tie to our industry than like the average consumer. And she's like affluent, you know, I mean, she's like well informed. And she was telling me a story about how she went into the grocery store the other day, and she was in the egg aisle, and she said the labels on the eggs, she said, I was overwhelmed. She said my kids were in the cart, so I didn't, you know, obviously a little bit flustered. She said she just grabbed a carton, she got home, and she said she ultimately felt scammed by the food industry. She didn't say by the chicken industry. She said by the food industry. She felt like agriculture as a whole, we did her dirty, you know, and it was those labels that were really overwhelming to her. So I think it is so valid, like you said, that we make sure that and that's why we're going to Southwest to talk about this, is like what food labels actually mean and how can we help our consumers better understand when they're used as a marketing ploy and when they're actually used to like inform a consumer.
I think in its original creation, just to follow what your friends were doing, it had no damage to your mental health. But in terms of what it's doing in terms of influencing, it has gotten to that point. Recently, I read a study that it affects two populations greatly in terms of mental health. And the first is teenage girls. So they're constantly comparing themselves in terms of what they should look like, what they should wear. But also, especially when talking about food, it said that those that were in their late 20s to early 30s were going into debt because of social media, because they are going to these restaurants that they can't afford, buying this $60 meal so that they can take a picture, kind of what we're discussing, and show you what they're eating, or they're only shopping at Whole Foods or organic products, and not because they necessarily want to, but because they feel like they have to show on their social media platforms that they are eating this high quality food. So I think that's kind of where we've gotten to the point, and it is a little damaging to our mental health in terms of like our economics and different things like that in comparison.
Yeah, that's such a good point. You're not just seeing, you know, your sister or your best friend's like food. You're seeing just random people on the internet. And I think TikTok is especially bad about this. Is TikTok, a lot of the content is not people you're following, right? Like on Instagram, it tends to be more people you have chosen, you've selected to follow, but Instagram very much gives you content from people you don't know or don't follow. And so even if you're trying to avoid that kind of content, it may like feed it to you. And part of this article gets into the fact that it feeds you, like if you are a 20-something woman, they get targeted for these kind of posts. And it even talks about how the influencers said those posts did better than other posts, the what I eat in a day, because the algorithm is feeding them to people. And so it is kind of crazy. My sister actually she lives in San Francisco, very much like urban, obviously at this point in her life, and she had a girlfriend who was increasingly stressed about her food choices in the grocery store, feeling a ton of guilt, shame, and confusion around the grocery store. And my sister actually introduced her to our podcast, and the girl came to my sister and said, thank you so much. Like, you have made me feel so much better about just going to a regular grocery store. You made me save money, that I am not feeling the need that I have to buy all of these products that these food influencers are telling me, that I can just go in and buy the regular food on the shelf and feel really good about it, knowing that it's still safe, that it's made by farmers, that it's not all these things that these food influencers have told me I need or don't need. And so it is really, like, I think, as I said at the very beginning, you can kind of overlook this article as like, roll your eyes, but there is some really deep-rooted issues here in this what I eat in a day conversation.
I think we have one more.
Yeah, just kind of have a couple of quotes that come to mind when we talk about this subject. First, comparison is the thief of joy. You know, it's so easy for us to put our lives on public display and then wonder why we feel like we're never satisfied. But also there's kind of an economics we think about. There's no such thing as a free lunch. And when we're talking about this topic, there's great opportunity for influence in the social media realm, especially in the agricultural community. So I'm kind of curious what your all's perspective is on, is this just a necessary evil that we continue to participate and try to advocate for our industry through these platforms, even if it kind of comes along with some of the negative aspects of comparison? Or is it worth, maybe opting out in some ways and finding alternative strategies to advocate to consumers for the industry that might not feed into the sort of comparison and consumeristic values of always trying to be better than someone else?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it is, as you worded, kind of like a necessary evil. I mean, I absolutely love social media. It has brought in so much joy and positivity to my life, and I do think it is something that our industry needs to continue to keep our finger of a pulse on. I talk about it all the time about how a lot of people will look at it like as a connection tool, or like maybe you even view social media as like a silly dancing app. Like that's all you can see it for. When you really peel it back, the onion that it is, at the core of it, what social media can be is a powerful marketing tool. And I think if our industry can understand that and really get behind that, it could be really great for us. Because one of my quotes I say a lot is, in agriculture, we do not have a product problem, we have a marketing problem. By golly, we have the perfect product. Like, everyone needs our product, and they need it 3 times a day, right? Like, where we're falling short a little bit in agriculture is marketing, and that's, for me, is where, like, social media could come in. It could be like, let me help you guys do this better.
Okay, so kind of taking this conversation beyond social media, another area that I think is having a big influence is thinking about TV. So we think about, these Netflix documentaries. Natalie and I just covered one this week, the You Are What You Eat. I say documentary in air quotes.
It's a doozy.
Yeah, it's not great. We give our rundown on it last week if you want to listen. But it really is like, when you think about these posts, whether it's coming from an influencer or whether it's a Netflix TV show, it is a performance. It is content created with a purpose of either a monetary, like that they want to receive money from a brand or a sponsor, or for someone like Netflix, obviously they're trying to get and sell subscriptions to their service. And so you're not seeing everyone's day-to-day. You're seeing a single snapshot that is a performance put on for social media. And I think we can really get lost in that when we're looking at all of these different posts. People really take it as like the end-all be-all of the conversation, like, oh my goodness, that lady's house is perfect, or what meal she's making for her kid is perfect, and not really thinking this is serving this woman to get likes or to go viral or whatever it may be. It's not the whole truth. It's more for entertainment. I think that something that's really important too, a part of this, is how the content is staged.
Yeah, getting into I think you called it performance.
Yeah.
It is. I think we have to keep that in mind, that when we are looking at the reels, I mean, even the reel you talked about with, the mother showing the food, it is not, I even thought when I saw that reel, I thought, is she even giving that to her kid, Or is she just doing this for the viral clicks and to go a little bit viral? And so I think it's so important to keep in mind that performance component. I also think we have to keep in mind that it's a little bit unwarranted, right? We're not always asking to be shown what we're being shown. It's a little bit of confirmation bias. Whether we're seeing it or not, or want to see it or not, we can be on a subconscious level informed by that, right? So this reel is saying this is what's good to eat in a day, this is what is bad to eat in a day, this is what I should or shouldn't eat in a day. And so it's just not the best when it comes to our mental health.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes from the article, I don't want to get this wrong, it said, we're being taught to not trust what we think we should eat or what we think our bodies should eat, and it's very tempting to try and follow what someone else is doing, which circles back to this conversation around these documentaries on Netflix. And this is actually my question to all of you guys, is, whether there's tons of these Netflix documentaries now, whether it's You Are What You Eat, Cowspiracy, Seaspiracy, Game Changers. They are telling people about food they should and shouldn't be eating, but they are also getting into agricultural and farming practices. So what do we think about Netflix and others, I hate to be picking on Netflix because it's a lot of them, about them releasing these shows as documentary, as truth, as factual information, when in reality they have very strong agendas? So do you guys feel like these should be labeled something different in the Netflix? Should they, have a disclaimer of who's sponsoring them? What are your guys' thoughts on these Netflix shows about food and agriculture?
books. I read a lot of books, and just a book nerd, but at the beginning of a lot of your books and novels that you read, there's the disclaimer of, this is not based on a person or a place or a real life event. And then when you see paid programming on TV, it's the thoughts expressed on this program are not reflective of the network that it's being showed on. And so I don't know that the label of documentary is necessarily the problem, because people are going to label it that way themselves, even if Netflix doesn't. But I think the disclaimer may be the way to go, of having the this show or this program reflects the thoughts and opinions of the producers and the stars of this. And so that disclaimer is, just because they say it's true doesn't mean it's true. Everything you read on the internet's not true, and everything you see on Netflix isn't either. And so I think that disclaimer may be a good start to the conversation, of just having that out there, of just because they're saying this doesn't mean that you've got to take it as the gospel.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. That the disclaimer, I mean, that really could be a very simple way about not changing a whole lot, not even having to get into the nitty gritty of who's sponsoring what or doing anything or even titling it something different in Netflix, that it just simply states like that, yes, it's a TV show, you know, it's for entertainment purposes. I want to take more questions, but I think we've got to move on, because we are getting down to the wire on time here. So Natalie, you want to keep it rolling?
Yes, we will move into our third article to discover this week. Headline, where's the headline? Scientists announce breakthrough discovery of safer gluten protein. So this was actually an article out of Farm Progress, and it highlighted Kansas State University. Wildcats? Yay, okay, Wildcats. Yeah. So a team of researchers from Kansas State University Wheat Genetics Resource Center and USDA's Agriculture Resource Service, with support from Kansas Wheat, announced in December that they successfully used the CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing technique to reduce 2 gluten-coding genes that are abundant in immunoreactive peptides. So in simpler terms, what they did is they figured out how to cut and replace. So they are taking out a portion of the DNA and then they are replacing it. And when they do that, they can reduce the toxicity of the gluten in a wheat line for people who have celiac disease. So the article actually said that they could suppress that immunoreactivity by 47-fold, which I think is absolutely crazy. And I think anyone with celiac disease would agree that that is going to be a major breakthrough for gluten intolerance.
I am so glad that that was your paragraph to read.
I read right from my phone.
I'm like, oh yeah, I don't want to cover any of that. But no, so beyond just celiac disease, I think of gluten intolerance similar to milk intolerance, like lactose intolerance, that a lot of people are self-diagnosing. And with that, it has been estimated that as much as 30% of the population claims to be avoiding gluten. So this could really be absolutely huge for so many people. But we know that historically, and yes, I am thinking about non-GMO and GMO and that whole conversation, that people do not always like tech and innovation in relation to their foods. One of my favorite quotes is actually from Jack Bobo, and it is the idea that people love innovation but hate change. And I think it speaks volumes in the tech and innovation space with food. So they want to see innovation. They'd love the idea of a food being gluten-free, but they don't love the idea of a food being quote-unquote produced in a lab. And so I'm bringing you guys into this conversation now. What do you guys think that consumers will think about gene editing? How do we approach this conversation around gene editing, maybe in a little bit better way than we approached the GMO conversation previously? This one's a big one.
Yay!
I think this subject is even more interesting now than ever, especially as society has changed how they view food. So I think I look at some of this a little different when it comes to the organic versus non-organic. Is also ag, and I'm pro-ag, not saying that you insinuated you weren't, but if somebody wants to spend more money to buy something organic, good for them, as long as they're not slandering the other selections in the grocery store. I don't necessarily have a problem with it. But, you know, for the last 50, 60, 70 years, we've mostly been using ag innovation as a way to increase productivity and to increase yields. And now society is more interested in their food, and I think since COVID, really more interested in nutrient-dense food. So the conversation of innovation is changing a little bit, especially in the last year of, okay, how do we look at ag innovation as a way to not just produce more food, but produce more nutrient-dense food. So maybe our yields aren't as high, but we're growing a better quality. I don't think anybody here has ever ate a tomato at Walmart and thought that it was better than the tomato that they got in their garden. It's just better. And so I think it'll be interesting, and I'd love your thoughts on where, similar to this, we're now using gene editing in a way to help people, and we're now talking about gene editing a way to make food more nutrient dense. So do you think that society may start looking at GE and CRISPR and GMOs differently if we're now using it to make food more quality than in quantity?
It's funny, like when you're talking, we're like,
I know we can't hear very well up here, so I'm
very
sorry. We're like have to be really listening. But no, that's actually a perfect segue. It goes into what we're talking about next. So on that note, let's roll into it.
I was going to say it's almost like we planted you to say that,
Yeah,
but we did
thank
not.
you. Thank you
But that is the second thing that stood out to me in this article was, like you said, agriculture opportunity. So like that added value, right? I'm going to drop a few facts here. The global gluten-free product market was worth just under $12 billion in 2023. And it's expected to grow by another 10% in the next 10 years. So basically, folks are not going to stop looking for, searching, consuming, buying gluten-free, right? Now, historically, this is something I didn't know, but maybe you guys know, that means that it had been a boom for crops like sorghum, because sorghum is naturally gluten-free, and so it can be used in place of wheat in many food applications, like from baked goods all the way to even beverages. So like you said, let's go beyond that though. What could it mean for future wheat farmers if we could actually grow targeted wheat varieties that have reduced gluten content, or even gluten that's been modified to be more tolerable? Like, that seems so exciting for wheat farmers, like that extra added value.
Yeah, I think about how tight margins are right now for, across the board in agriculture. So these value-added products and just tweaking a little bit of what we're doing to make a completely different product is really exciting for me. Like, I think about the Fairlifes of the world, the Fairlife milks, and I'm a part of Select Co-op that founded Fairlife, and I just think about how we took a product, we were already producing milk, and it was like, how can we tweak it just a little bit to give the consumer what they're asking for? We're in a phase right now where people want more protein and less sugar, so how can we tailor our product to meet that demand and add a value to it? It's not that it's replacing milk. There's going to be people like me who are going to buy the cheapest milk on the shelf every time, but it's for those people that are looking for that specialty product and adding value to it, that they're willing to pay for it. And some other products that we've talked about on the podcast is the craze around animal-based products like beef tallow and colostrum-based products. So, dairy farmers, we end up with a lot of colostrum. We have an excess of colostrum. And so I don't want to say it's a waste, because it's not a waste, we sell it. But how could we add value to this product? And I actually know a dairy farmer in Washington State that is taking colostrum and turning it into a skincare line. And I just think that is so cool to think about a product that maybe has been overlooked in the past, and now we are turning it into a value-added product. And so I want to turn this over again to you guys and kind of see, like, do you think that ag should be focused on kind of these non-traditional innovations within the ag space to have these value-added products? And we already have the mic with someone.
I was just going to comment a little more on GMO and gene editing. I think the problem with the GMOs was most of the products that gave benefit to the farmer, herbicide resistance, bug resistance. The consumer did not see the value. Where I see gene editing being more receptive is it's going to help the consumer directly.
Thank you. Appreciate that comment.
Yeah, no, that is such a good point. And even going back to like what Tara was talking about with like the colostrum or the beef tallow, that is one thing that immediately stood out to me is, like Tara mentioned, like dairy farmers can sell their colostrum, but to me that's like agriculture to agriculture, right? And when you twist it and you do it in this other way, it's agriculture to consumers. And I feel like it's looping them in, and like you said, it's helping them understand these other added extra values and like what that could mean for them in bettering their lives.
One more question.
To the gene editing. So I have alpha-gal. I cannot eat mammalian meat, but there's a company that is gene edited pigs for medical purposes, and the meat is a bonus. And so a lot of people in the alpha-gal community love it. We can't purchase the meat, but the company ships it to you for free. And so I have a friend with celiac and alpha-gal, and I think like this would be loved. Gene editing, I think, could be warm welcomed by people with certain allergies who are limited and feel that it's hard to enjoy some of the things that you used to enjoy. So
Yeah.
I think it's cool.
We actually talked about, thank you for sharing that. We actually talked about Alpha Gal on the podcast a while ago, and that was so fascinating. We always said we wanted to like talk to someone. So it is so nice to meet an alpha. Like,
Yes.
the alpha. But no, we're actually gonna this coming Thursday. We're actually having Joby Young on the podcast from American Farm Bureau, and he's going to give their thoughts on gene editing. He's also going to give their thoughts on mental health, as well as the farm bill, all the topics we talked about. So it'll be interesting to kind of get some of the things you guys have said too and bring that back to him. So thank you for everything you guys have contributed.
Yeah, Joby's going to be coming on, as Natalie said, to talk about mental health. We're going to be talking about the farm state of mind that American Farm Bureau is currently working on. So you will have to tune into the actual podcast of this on Thursday to catch all that Joby has to bring. So with that, I think maybe we should open it up for a couple questions. We have about 5 minutes left. You guys asked lots of questions throughout. I thought we were gonna, you guys really came through.
And if you guys, right now it's general questions, so it doesn't need to be on anything we covered. If you guys just have general questions for us, that's fine too. It does not have to be like topic, the 3 topics we covered specific.
All right, we have our first question.
First off, so my question is, do you ladies have any advice for anyone looking to get started in the podcasting space in food and agriculture? It feels like it's like almost saturated, so how do you stand out? How do you break through?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think that if you're looking at, social media as a whole, I feel like maybe if you're in the fashion influencing space on Instagram, that's pretty saturated. To say that ag would be saturated, I know it feels like it when you're within ag, but when you think that like less than 2% of the population is actually directly involved in ag, it makes that what we're doing a very niche down topic. And so I think find what you love specifically about ag and really run with it. I feel like podcasting, being niche down, can be so good for growth and so strong. And so I don't know, that'd be kind of my 2 cents.
Yeah, and that's really, I love the podcasting space, so it's really exciting that you're thinking about joining it. I would echo what Tara said. I think there's plenty of room for another ag podcast, so if you're thinking about it, we're happy to talk to you afterwards, or you can hit us up and we can share more about
podcasting
that.
Podcasting is such a low barrier to entry. Like, you can do it with something as simple as the voice notes on your phone. You can make it as complicated as you want to, but like it can be really, really simple to jump on and be able to create some really great audio. Other questions for us?
Right here. Sorry.
Oh.
As 2 people that are very forward thinking in this industry and are making great traction for the agricultural industry, what is your takeaway as a young farmer and rancher? What do you say? What is your advice to us to help the agriculture industry move forward?
Yeah, I'm actually creating a different keynote than the ones I've referenced about this, where I share mine and my husband's story. So I'm technically 4th generation and he is technically 5th generation, but the operation that we ranch in Nebraska is 1st generation. And so I talk a lot about how we have advanced ourselves and kind of built a successful operation through like risk-taking and bravery. And I think that can be really, really hard in agriculture because it is kind of like a high intensive capital. Like there's a lot of barriers when it comes to being like young in agriculture. And so I talk a lot about like just as scary as it is, like going for it and taking the risk, because it's really paid off twofold for us when we have ever kind of like doubled down on different things within our operation and just kind of like believed in ourselves.
All right, I think we have time for one more question before we wrap it up. Any final question? And we'll stick around afterwards. We'll come off stage. If people want to come up and ask us other questions, we're happy to do that.
Don't fight over it, you guys. we don't need a arm wrestle out here in the audience.
So as far as they often talk about the outgoing generation of agriculturalists. And agriculture today, they're just generally an older group of individuals. And so for youth and progression and everything, just general, what's your Twitter advice, I guess, your 140 character advice for the youth coming into ag to not only negate the negative, but also bring in the positive for ag?
Yeah, so I feel like my answer to this, I don't know if you're going to like it or not, but I feel like every generation brings something so different, and I feel like Gen Z and then Gen Alpha even more so Like, I do not feel qualified to give them advice on how to come in because I feel like they are doing things in their own way. They're embracing social media and all of these different tools. I mean, it's so far beyond social media, but it's easy to point the finger at social media in ways we've never done that. And so I actually am just curious about how they're going to bring their own spin to everything and do things differently than us and think outside the box from us and maybe bring some new ideas to us. Like, I think about, you know, whether it's a son or daughter that leaves the farm, goes to college, and comes back with the ideas, and sometimes is not always heard or listened to. And I try to keep that in mind. Like, I think instead of us like instilling wisdom always on the next generation, there is like a lot to gain from them as well. Sorry, excuse me.
We'll do the last one. Yeah, we have 2 minutes. We're fine.
We're good, right?
We're good.
Okay,
We're good.
perfect. Just want to say I enjoy you guys' podcast.
Thank you.
My name is Cam Hammond. I'm with Idaho Farm Bureau. And Natalie, you said that podcasters go on other people's podcasts. So I think you might know where I'm going with this. We have a podcast called Dirt Road Discussions. We talk about unique things going on in agriculture. And that's my question. Would you want to come on the podcast sometime?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We'd love to. We saw your guys' sign in the back, and we were like, oh, I wonder what that podcast is
perfect.
about.
It's a fantastic podcast, and I may be a little biased because I'm one of the hosts, but we'd love to have you on sometime. So
That sounds
Awesome.
great.
Thank you.
We'll connect. Thank you. All right. Well, if you guys enjoyed discovering with us today as much as we enjoyed discovering with you, we are, as I said, a once Thursday podcast. You can find us on any podcasting platforms. I don't know if that image is still up, but the Scantron is there, so you can even go put your phone there, and it'll bring you right to where you need to go to the podcasting space. And we would love to discover with you every single Thursday. Thank you, you guys.
Thank you, guys.
Have your attention for just 1 second. My name is Sakia White, and I am with the Utah Farm Bureau. And I don't know if you just heard a second ago, we let out some hoop and hollers and some cheers. If you haven't been over to this corner over here to this service project, get over there. We opened at 12 o'clock, and the hoop and hollers was just to let everybody know. We set a goal to package 2 semi-loads of food. And we just packaged our first semi-load of food already. So go ahead and cheer for your folks. I want to share for just a second, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints donated all the food to make that happen. And we went to them and we said, what happens if we package 2 semi-loads before the trade show's over? And they said, we'll donate you 2 more semi-loads, and we'll let you send that to Kentucky Farm Bureau so they can donate it to their people. So when you have a second, get over there, push someone else off the line, and let's get 4 semi-loads of food shipped out of this convention for people in need. Thank you, guys.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chase Heineman. I'm the Director of Industry Relations at American Farm Bureau Federation. I'm delighted to be here today to engage in this very important discussion. Everyday decisions are made all along the supply chain that have tremendous impacts on the ability of the food and agriculture sector to provide a strong food system for consumers. As the food system comes under increasing pressure, it is vital that all stakeholders in the supply chain maintain an open flow of communication to discuss shared challenges and opportunities to overcome them by working together. Today we're going to do just that. We are fortunate to be joined today by representatives of key stakeholders at the other end of the supply chain. Food companies, restaurants, and retailers face many of the same obstacles that the agriculture community face. And this panel will allow us to discuss how these industries are working together to meet those challenges and how all supply chain stakeholders can work together to strengthen the U.S. food system. Let's meet our panelists. Dave Davis is the President and Chief Legal Officer of the Utah Food Industry Association. Dave joined the association in 2007 as their Vice President and General Counsel, and was elected by the Board of Directors to serve as President in March of 2010. As the President of the Association, Dave serves as the spokesman and chief lobbyist for the grocery and convenience store industries in Utah. Thank you for being here, Dave.
It's good to be with you.
Melva Sine is also here with us. She serves as the President of the Utah Restaurant Association. As President, Melva Melva acts as the voice of the restaurant and food service industry in the state of Utah. In her position, she oversees board and committee functions, direction of events, education programs, and all day-to-day operations of the association. During her tenure, Melva charted a course for survival for Utah's restaurants through the unprecedented challenges created by the pandemic and helped restaurants deal successfully with the impacts. Thank you for being here with us, Melva.
Thank you for the invitation.
We also have another panelist, Tom Madrecki from the Consumer Brands Association. He has been detained in traffic, so he is rushing here. He's also a very important voice along with Melva and Dave. If he gets here in time, we hope he is going to join us. So you may see someone join this panel as well. We want to make sure that the food companies alongside the retailers and restaurants are here as well. So he may join us shortly. But I do want to again thank each of you for being here in this important discussion and providing your insights. I want to kick things off by having each of you speak a little bit more about the work that you are doing specifically and that your organizations are doing, and also the members of your organization are doing within the supply chain and the role and function that you serve here in Utah and what your segments of the supply chain do really across the nation. So Melva, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. So I think the pandemic had some good results, and it had also many very negative results. But one of the good things that came from the pandemic was the opportunity and the need for us to actually work together at many levels where we hadn't in the past, where maybe we have local farmers and local ranchers, but not filling needs with the restaurant industry and not collaborating with the restaurant industry. And the pandemic kind of threw us into that. You've got to address these issues. We've got to have supplies at the local level. And so therefore, I think farmers and ranchers and restaurants and everyone in the food supply chain got together and said, okay, how do we meet these needs? How do we meet these needs on a daily basis? How do we meet these needs in 6 months from now? And what does the future look like for us? And so I think that became our role as the Utah Restaurant Association, was to make sure that restaurants were meeting with local farms, meeting with the ranchers and whatnot, who could supply them when there was not another viable supply chain available.
Thank you so much, Melva, and appreciate the work that you do and those insights. Dave, how about you?
So, first of all, thank you for the invite to be here. And can I, before I talk about what I do, just thank all of you that are out there. I represent retail stores, and specifically grocery and convenience stores. And without the work that all of you do out there, we don't have anything to sell. And so I think as we talk today, one of the things that we need to talk about is how do we work together, farm to fork, to make sure that we're continuing to deliver what is the most economical and safest food supply chain that's anywhere in the world. So thank you to all of you. So as I said, I run the Utah Food Industry Association, Utah Retail Merchants Association. And some of our focus is about how do we educate people better about how food gets made and how it gets to the case. Everyone loves to look in the cold case at that hamburger that sits there, but they don't recognize what needs to happen in order to make that appear there in your case. So I think that that's one of the things that we're really focused on, is how do we educate people about the food supply chain, all of the good work that is done at the farm, at the processor, and then at the grocer to be able to deliver that product to you.
Thank you so much, Dave, and we couldn't agree more on that, about making sure consumers understand where their food comes from and where it starts, right? I'd like to begin the question portion of this discussion with how do you view, and you talked a little bit about this, Dave, how do you all view your segments of the supply chain and their relationship with farmers and ranchers? And certainly, how do you think that relationship can grow in the future?
Yeah, you know, and I said it before, without what people do at the farm, we have nothing to sell. And so I think we have to look for every opportunity to be able to work closely together. I see some of my friends out here at the Utah Farm Bureau, and I know that from a policy perspective, we're consistently working together to try to protect our food supply chain. So I think that we really need to look for those opportunities to work together and see how we can make sure that people understand how things happen.
Absolutely. How about you, Melva?
Well, I think for the restaurant industry, it's important for us to relate to the farmer and the rancher. And for the industry to do that, we do that through many educational processes. We have a program called ProStart that is in our high schools in the state of Utah that teach young people, 11th and 12th graders in high school, of what that process of food is. Not only do they just cook it and do they learn about the management of a specific operation, they actually experience where food is grown. They actually visit farms. They actually have the opportunity to talk with people. And we've had ProStart in our schools for the past 20 years in the state of Utah, so we've been able to make some really strong headways in terms of educating our young people about what it is to understand difficult work. Work in the restaurant industry is difficult. Work on a farm is difficult, and having young people really experience what it is to be ethically involved in such a work ethic that brings them to realize there is a future, there's a career opportunity, there are all these advantages. And then we also have a program that we air every Sunday morning. It's a half-an-hour show, and it's called Taste Utah. And we actually take, because our theme is dining is the destination, but there's a food story that goes along with every dining experience. And so taking them to the farm to see what the product is that they're going to be eating in a restaurant or being served or preparing even in their homes, so that they're going to be able to know that those products are safe, what care has the farmer has taken, what care the rancher has taken, and they can actually see that and experience that. And so that's part of is to make what we do entertaining, fun, and engaging, and yet at the same time be educating them about this process.
Well, I would love to hear that. Education is a key component of the work that farm bureaus, state farm bureaus, and county farm bureaus, and American farm bureaus do across the year, including through foundation work, through their promotion and education committees. So we love to hear that. And thank you for the work that you're doing with the restaurant industry here on that front in Utah.
So Chase, can I just add on to what Melva said? She talked about maybe an image problem and getting people excited about being in the restaurant business. And we face some of those same challenges as well in the grocery business. Getting people excited about a career in grocery. And I know that out at the farm as well, there's challenges that come with what does the next generation look like. But I think as much as we can really promote the great lifestyle that it can provide, the great advancement opportunities that there are in the retail segment of the business, and that it really can be a career. It doesn't just have to be a short-time stop. Now, at retail, sometimes we do give people their first exposure to work. And we're grateful to do that, and we have lots of people that come into our system and then exit the system and go on to other things. But there are so many people. I'm a product of the food industry. I started bagging groceries, and and stocking shelves and came up through the system. And so I just think that there are great career opportunities at retail, both at restaurants and at grocery stores, and there are great career options as farmers as well. And I just hope that we don't lose that next generation of farmers.
What I think you hit on something, it's also the importance of the work, right? I mean, no supply chain, no food system, no food, no people, right? All of these links have to work together, and that's what this conversation is about. All of them have to work together in order to feed and fuel this country and the world. So absolutely, we agree on that. I want to ask you all, what do you all see as sort of the most pressing challenge facing your segments of the supply chain in 2024 and beyond? And how are the members of your organization, and your organizations in particular, as membership organizations, working to address them?
So I mentioned this, but staffing is an issue. And staffing is an issue that has been really aggravated by COVID as well. I hate to go down this path. It feels like we blame the world's problems on COVID, but during that time where people sort of bunkered down during COVID, and also all of a sudden we have this remote work culture that is starting to blossom up. People want to work from home. They want to work from their basements, from their computers. Well, quite frankly, working in a grocery store and stocking a shelf is really difficult to do from your basement. I think Melva would agree.
Yeah,
Serving a customer is difficult to do from your basement. And so how do we play up what the real benefits of being out there, interfacing with customers, working shoulder to shoulder with coworkers? I think that we've got some staffing issues that we really have to overcome.
Yeah, I think for the restaurant industry, the pandemic opened our eyes to many things when it came to how do we make sure that our customers and the consumers are receiving the service, product, safety, all of the things that they want to address when it comes to their food and how it's prepared and where it's been grown and all of those questions and whatnot. So when it comes to making sure that the supply chain is available, we have all of those same things, all of the same things that you're experiencing. High labor costs, not just getting the people to come to work for us, but the high labor costs that they are. The product increases, inflation, all of the things that have come together now to create a really challenging business climate, regardless of what business that you're in. But for restaurants, and especially our small independent restaurants that we see throughout the state, who are the ones that are able to source from a local farm or source from a local rancher, because they only need a certain amount of supplies and products and whatnot. And that's one of the problems that we faced, was getting enough produced by a particular farmer or a particular to serve the restaurant industry, because in my home I might eat 5 pounds of carrots in a month. In a restaurant you're going to use 250 pounds of carrots in a week, right? And so getting that balance so that we have the supply chain we need so that a restaurant can depend on a local farm, depend on a local rancher to make sure that we address those issues so that we can source locally, because we all know there is a trend, and the trend of having local products and local sourcing is vitality to the restaurant industry. That, oh yeah, I got this from this local farm, or I was able to source this, or I was able to get something, because we can all buy a variety of different brands, but people really want to stay local, buy local, and support their local economies.
So Melva, to that point, and I would just echo what Melva just said there. We want to buy local. We really do. There are some challenges at times with scale. If you have 40 grocery stores, it sometimes is difficult because you can't get the volumes that you need. But I think that that's a way that we can really partner together, where we can help farmers understand this is the scale that we need. This is the process of getting your product into a retail store, whether it's a restaurant or a grocery store. I think the more that we can partner on those types of things so that more local products can get to our consumers, I think it'd be a great thing.
I just want to move on to policy here for a minute, because you both work on this. It probably takes up a lot of your time, if not most of your time. And we were having a conversation. Your legislative session started this week here in Salt Lake City. I just wanted to give you all an opportunity to let us know about what your organization, your industry's top regulatory and legislative policy issues are in 2024 and beyond. Particularly those types of policy issues that you think are connected to the agriculture community.
Well, actually, I spent, I don't know, I was up until 1 o'clock in the morning. I was sending emails at 1 o'clock this morning, and I was noticing, and I actually looked up food quality, all of these things related to food and legislative bills that might need to be addressed, or that we might need to make sure we give input on. And there was only one bill on food, and so I think that we are aware of what the food needs are, and trying to educate, like you all need to each know who your legislator is, at the state level, at the federal level. The way we actually accomplish things for our industries is that we become engaged. We make sure we know the first name of our legislator, that we make sure we know the first name of the mayor, or those people who create local policy over us. Most of these things that relate to our local products are happening at the local level, and so you need to become engaged as we ask our members to become engaged, so that when we send out a notice that says, oh, there's this issue that's happening and we need a response, that people show up at the Capitol for a committee hearing to give testimony. How is this going to impact you? What are going to be the results? Because lots of times legislation is passed and there isn't a consideration for what the final outcome will be. Many of these people are not in our industry, and they're not educated about our industry in terms of what we need and how regulations impact us and affect us. And it takes each of us to be that voice. Yes, Dave and I are there most of the time. Dave's there a lot more often than I am, because I hire a contract lobbyist to do that stuff, because there's still so many day-to-day things that we have to accomplish for our schools and for all of the other programs that we have. But legislation and that education process of legislators takes all of us in order to pass legislation and regulations that the final outcome will be a good result both for our government and for the industry.
And before I move on to you, Dave, I will just say you're looking at a group that knows how to engage. Farm Bureau at its core knows how to engage with legislators, knows how to influence policy, because they are policymakers. So I guarantee a lot of these folks have been in state houses and then probably even in Congress too.
Oh yeah, we work with you.
So you've probably worked with quite a few of them.
So as Chase mentioned, I spend a lot of time at our state capitol during the legislative session, almost every day. And I can tell you this, I know when it's going to be a good day at the Capitol before I ever walk through those doors, because I look at the parking lot, and if there are a whole bunch of pickup trucks out there, I know it's going to be a good day at the Capitol. We have our rural caucus every Friday, and Friday when I drove into the Capitol, there was a sea of pickup trucks out there, and I thought, today's going to be a good day at the Capitol. So a few issues that we're working on. We're always concerned about keeping the cost of food low. Utah is one of the few states that still has a sales tax on food. So we're working to bring the sales tax off of food to make food even more affordable for consumers out there. And then just generally over-regulation. Let's all be honest here. Most of the bizarre and oppressive regulation is coming east of here, right, in Washington, D.C. Menu labeling is something that was really big in the grocery industry, and all of the logistics around making menu labeling happening. And it was just bizarre. I don't know how you all are, but when I go into a grocery store and I look at a quarter sheet cake, is it helpful to you to know that there are 30,000 calories in that sheet cake? I don't think so. And so I just see government overreaching with maybe good intention, but implementation becomes burdensome and it just drives up the cost of food. So any way that we can work together farm to fork to reduce regulations, still making sure that we're providing a very, very safe food supply, but working on making sure that we're not laboring both at the farm, at the processor, at the retailer with overburdensome regulations.
I appreciate that perspective. Shifting here a little bit, you both represent industries that are consumer facing, right? You service consumers directly. And as we know, consumers are increasingly interested in where their food comes from. Maybe more now than ever before, than they could have possibly been 10 years ago even. That creates challenges for the supply chain, but also opportunities. And I'm interested in your all's opinion on the challenges that your member organizations have faced due to that rise in consumer interest, and how you've addressed those challenges while also trying to build trust with consumers.
Yeah. So it's a really, really great question. I don't know if by show of hands out there, do we have dairymen out there? Any dairymen out there? I mean, we love our dairymen. Let me tell you a challenge. You're right. Consumers are more interested in where their food comes from and what goes into their food. And we've got to get this right. We have to get this right. And it means education on our part as well. I was raised in the retail industry where the consumer is always right. The unfortunate thing is the consumer isn't always right. Let me give you a good example. And please don't storm the stage, because I know I'm going to talk about RBST and the use of RBST. So it's a hormone that dairy farmers will use from time to time to increase the production of milk. I know, because my Farm Bureau friends have schooled me on this, that there is no difference in the end product between a cow that has been treated with RBST and one that has not. BST is something that naturally occurs in milk. That being said, the consumer thinks that there is. And so there was a push some time back to remove RBST from use, and it really hurt our dairy farmers. But it's an example of where we've got to do a better job at retail in educating the consumer so that we can keep every tool in the belt for our producers to be able to produce product that is economical and will keep them in business as well. So let's look for those opportunities to be able to work together to educate the consumer about what the reality is, rather than letting them give in to hysteria around things that may not actually be reality.
Yeah, so when it comes to those types of issues, we had a few restaurant owners who met with their local distributors and just found out that there are only going to be cage-free eggs available in Utah. And so the cost of a case of eggs has gone from $27.85 to $35.75. And so it's an item that we got bypassed on as far as the restaurant industry, and we're the end consumer as far as buying those for breakfast and a multitude of items that we prepare in our restaurants. And I'm not sure how farmers and ranchers actually feel about that. I know they were impacted when they said, okay, you're all going to have to convert and go to this process of cage-free. And now we have industry people saying, look, that is a cost that is going to make it difficult for me in my operation, that I don't have the opportunity to use cage-free eggs if I would like, or to use those eggs that are, you know, in a cage, or where animals, or where the birds, the hens are together and whatnot. So it's created. We like Dave want to keep costs low for our restaurants, because if we're not able to do that, we've found, and we've done studies that said each time you increase the cost by 1%, you lose 7 customers a week. Well, we've seen inflation reach 6-7%, which means we're losing customers in our restaurants, and we need to be able to make sure that everything that we can control, that we have as many options, that we have whatever available, so that these restaurants can continue to provide the service and the products that the consumers want. And this is part of the education process. Is there a benefit to a cage-free egg versus a non-cage-free egg? Is there a benefit to an organic versus a non-organic? These are the types of things that consumers are asking and that they want to know about and whatnot, and that we need to be able to educate them as to why that might be happening, or what the need has been that created that. Because you find that most people are willing to pay for something that they understand has a true value and benefit to it. So we need to help consumers understand that. That's what we're trying to work with our restaurants, to try and help them understand that if a policy is passed, then we need to research the reason and not just say, oh, that has increased our cost. Has it increased our cost, and we can then relate a value to that? Because if we can relate the value to it, then we can see the need that we need to, you know, follow through with that particular policy. But
and I will say that sometimes I sometimes feel like consumers know they want something, but they don't know necessarily what they want, or because they're told, you know, maybe unscientific based things about the food system, and it's our job to educate, right, and to use science-based facts about the food system to combat misinformation. But I'm also curious on that fact of consumers. Consumers are constantly asking for more information, constantly asking for more things, which puts pressure on your members to provide it, which then trickles up to our Farm Bureau members to track data, to you know, potentially policy things that puts more pressures on them. And I'm curious of how that has impacted your members, of this over the past decade of consumers asking for more information, and then maybe sometimes your members collect it and consumers are like, hey, I don't know if I actually really need it. I mean, have you seen that you go through all this trouble of collecting stuff because you think the consumers are going to use it and then they don't?
I think for us in the restaurant industry, that becomes a training process with our employees, right? With the people who are working in the industry, to make sure that people understand the items that are on the menu. I mean, the training that is required to actually work in the restaurant industry, from food safety manager to food handler to the multiplicity of requirements around training, it becomes necessary that they have that information so they can do that very thing. So that when they're in the restaurant and someone asks for a particular product, or why can't I order my eggs sunny side up, or why can't I do this and whatnot, we can give them an explanation for why that might not be in their best interest as far as a regulatory authority is concerned. We at the restaurant want to give you whatever you want, however you want it, whenever you want it, right? But at sometimes we're limited in how we can process all of that.
So, Chase, I think the answer to your question is overwhelmingly yes. We're in this point in society where people want information about everything, and I think that we're overwhelming them with information. I think about all of the labeling that's required on food and all of the warning signs and things like this that we're being asked to do. And I have the same thoughts that you do. How often does a consumer actually use that? How is that beneficial to the consumer? I think what we need to focus on is what are the things that the consumer really needs and limit it as much as we can to that so that we're not back to overburdening, whether it's a restaurant, a retail store, a producer. I just think we know so much more about our food, and knowing that that piece of fish was raised here and processed here, and then it went here, and then it went there, I wonder how valuable that is to the consumer at the end of the day.
Well, I know your members are good partners in the supply chain, and I would just always reiterate that any additional requirement on suppliers trickles up and is just another thing that farmers and ranchers have to do. So we always, ask just to open communication flow and that not undue burdens are, and if there is a burden, it's shared.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, Chase, I just want to mention, in my mind, it's kind of a generational thing, right? In other words, I know what I like to eat. I go and get what I like to eat, and if it's, more calories than what I should be eating, then I just need to run an extra mile and whatnot. But, I watch my young children with their children and how they do read the labels and how they do seek out that information and whatnot. I don't have time to, go through and care if a can of soup has this or if a product has that and whatnot. I'm very trusting maybe, but I think that it's generational because I see that we are doing more of that training. Like we have seen the food pyramid change drastically, right? And who knows now and who knows what's true out there? And that's part of the problem, is that we have a little bit of distrust because we change things so drastically, and people don't know if all of the testing and all of the data and all of the information is actually real.
Well, thank you all. I want to shift a little bit here. Speaking of communication, communication between stakeholders along the supply chain is vital, as we've said many, many, many times, but it hasn't always been a consistent priority. It seems to have improved, especially in the digital age when communication's easier. And I wanted to ask you all, how do you think that the farmers and ranchers represented by Farm Bureau and the industry partners represented by organizations like yours can better work together and communicate so that we can share this information like we're talking about today, to continue this conversation, so that when you all have challenges, you can share that information, and when we say, hey, this is a problem, we can share that as well. I mean, how do you all do that here in Utah? How do you think you have best practices that we can replicate elsewhere?
Yeah, so here are my thoughts. We're all in the relationship business. And I think that you have to take the time to build the relationships with your counterparts in those other organizations. As I mentioned, I see Wade Garrett right there on the front row from Utah Farm Bureau. And he and I have had a long-standing relationship, so that when things pertaining to food come up from a policy perspective, from a relationship perspective, I know where to go, who my partner is. Just this last Friday, Wade and I were tag teaming a senator over a food bill, and really educating him about the far-reaching impacts of what he's doing. It goes beyond just the Farm Bureau. You're talking about your local Department of Agriculture and Food, your national associations, and just making sure that you take the time to build those relationships. Because I feel comfortable if Wade gets involved in a policy issue and it's going to impact retail food, he's going to pick up the phone and he's going to call and he's going to say, Dave, we got an issue. And even if we're on opposite sides of the issue, because we've built that relationship, I feel comfortable that Wade's even going to pick up the phone and say, look, we're going to do something here and you're not going to like it, but we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, Wade, you got a lot of mentions up here.
Yeah, and I think that's very effective what Dave is talking about. He's going to get a call from us in the next week or so talking about the removal of sales tax on food and how that's going to impact food sales in restaurants, and how we want to work with him to resolve some of the issues that are going to be created when we make that move into transitioning and taking off the sales tax on food, yet we're still paying the sales tax on food that we sell in restaurants, which, you know, is complimentary food in some instances as what was sold in grocery stores. So there's a lot of detail to work out, but I have a relationship with Dave. Dave knows that I'll call him on that issue and we'll talk that through. We also exchange newsletters, and we have in the state of Utah, we have what we call the Utah Business Coalition. The coalition meets all the time. We talk about the different industries, the different legislation, the different items that are going on, so that we know if there's something that we don't like, or more importantly, if there's something that we do like that we can all work together on. But many times we are finding ourselves working on an issue, maybe not hand in hand, but we've at least acknowledged to each other that there's an issue or there's a problem that we need to, you know, make each other aware of, that we're going to be working on this, and we may not agree, we may not 100% have the same view on any particular issue that might be being addressed at a local level or even a national level. Because there are lots of things that impact us in relationship to food and the sale of food, from credit card sales to just the myriad of things that we deal with as businesses on a daily basis that may not impact every industry at the same level. So yeah, I think having that open line of communication, as we've said, we work with the farms on our shows, and we work with the farms and the ranchers, the dairy farmers. We've shown them all, shown how they milk a cow, just the whole process, and we love the return and the information we get back from consumers about how great that was to actually be able to experience that. So it's been a great opportunity to work closely with ranchers and farmers.
You know, Chase, Melva hits on a really good point. She mentioned there are times that we don't agree on various issues, and I really think you learn more about people when you disagree than necessarily when you agree. And Melva has been a great partner. I think Ronald Reagan said it best when he says, look, somebody who agrees with you 80% of the time, they're a friend, not a 20% traitor. They're a friend. And I just think from a restaurant perspective, from a Farm Bureau perspective, 80 to 90% of the time, we're on the same page. And it's so great to have relationships with good people where you can disagree and still not be disagreeable about it.
Well, thank you both for that. As we wrap up here, I just wanted to give you both the opportunity from your perspective to talk about what you're most excited about. Looking into the future from the retailer perspective, from the restaurant perspective, what are you most excited about with the supply, within the supply chain? And maybe talk a little bit about what you see as potentially the biggest challenge coming down the pike that you think we can overcome if we work together as an integrated supply chain, working together as stakeholders.
First, Dave.
So Melva is so nice. She's allowing me to go first. I am unabashedly a food geek. I love my retailers. They inspire me. One of the beautiful things that came out of COVID was the fact that as we looked at the food supply chain, and I include the farmers, the processors, and the ultimate retailers that delivered the food, it was one of the few systems that did not break down during COVID. My grocery workers, when everyone else bunkered down, they strapped on their aprons and they went to work. And they went to work to take the products that all of you kept producing and deliver that to the end consumer. In our organization, we have a very, very concise purpose statement, and that is we protect and serve the companies that feed your communities. That's what we do. And you asked what I'm excited about. I'm excited about that. I'm excited about representing retailers that are part of that food system. I'm excited about the opportunities to be able to interface with people that produce the food that feed our communities. I'm grateful for that, and I'm never going to apologize for being part of that system.
So I have to say that I have a son-in-law, and his kind of theme for his family is faith, family, and football. But in my family, it's faith, family, and food. And so we kind of build everything around what we see happening. And I guess I'm most excited to see the restaurant industry coming back to life. On March 18th, 2020, in our state, restaurants were closed. They could no longer operate their kitchens. They had to basically do delivery and those kinds of things. We went from 111,000 employees to approximately 63,000 employees in a matter of a week. All right, and so we have been building back since that time, building back stronger and better, and we continue to do that thanks to, as Dave says, all of the products, your dedicated workforce. You know, we worked with ranchers and farmers to try and get product we knew the difficulties you were experiencing, and the great thing about the pandemic is none of us blamed each other. We all said, we have got to see how we can resolve and work through all of these problems to the advantage of each participating group. And that has now resulted in such a strong connection for our industries to be connected together, bonded, so that we are able to look forward to the future. Our growth is sustained by your growth. If you're not growing and producing and helping us to provide this great product and service to consumers that come into our restaurants, then our restaurants don't exist. And so we are employing in the restaurant industry in the state of Utah, we are just back to pre-pandemic levels of just over 111,000 employees. We're over 5,000 restaurants in the state. And so I'm excited that as we see the industry coming back to life and blossoming, that it's because of your efforts, because of what you're doing, but because we are all willing now to stretch a little bit and work together at every level.
Chase, can I say as well, I mentioned I'm so proud of our grocery workers, but I'm really proud of all of you as well. I know that this isn't news to you, but agriculture is sometimes not a pretty business, and I don't think any one of you should ever be ashamed about what it is that you do out there. You are the lifeblood of feeding our communities. And even when agriculture gets ugly and the media portrays it in a way that isn't pretty, I'm just grateful to all of you, because you're the reason that we can have that pretty looking hamburger patty in our case. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you both, and I think I can also say thank you for the work that you all do, and thank you so much for the work that your members do, because our members grow, raise food, and you all are the outlets for that, so to get it to the consumers. And we are so grateful, Melva and Dave, for you all being here today and for being a part of this discussion. I'll just say that as we've highlighted, meeting the challenges facing the supply chain is going to require all of us working together in unison and keeping the communication channel's open. We've had a lot of discussion about that today, and we've discussed how we as farmers and ranchers, retailers and restaurants can work together to continue to strengthen that supply chain and ensure consumers have access to the strongest, safest food system in the world. So I just want to again thank both of you, and I would ask if everyone would give the panelists a round of applause. Thank you all. Thank you all for coming.
Hi. Welcome to the announcement of those advancing round and the Achievement Award Top 10. I am Heather Baker, AFBF YF&R Committee Member and Discussion Meet Subcommittee Chair from Massachusetts. I would like to take a moment to thank the sponsors of the YF&R competitive events. Please help me in showing our appreciation to Stanley Black & Decker, American Ag, Case IH, and Ford for their generous support of our YF&R competitions. Through their support, we will award over $200,000 in cash and prizes on Monday to our competitors. After the announcement of those advancing to the Sweet 16 round of the discussion meet, I will turn the stage over to Jonathan Sanders, AFBF YF&R Committee Member and Annual Convention Subcommittee Chair from Alabama, to announce those competitors making the Achievement Award Top 10. We have had 2 tremendous rounds of competition today and have 2 more lined up over the next 2 days here in Salt Lake City. The Sweet 16 round will take place tomorrow at 1:15 p.m. here at the Salt Palace Convention Center. The final 4 will take place here on the Cultivation Center stage on Monday morning starting promptly at 8 a.m. I am now pleased to announce the top 16 individuals and their respective room assignments. So exciting. Competing in room 250AB is Dalton Dobson from Arizona, Austin Granby from Illinois, Cole Likely from Idaho, Caleb McLaurin from Texas. Competing in room 250DE will be Laura Holmgren from Utah, Todd Lackman from Montana, Jacob Walter from Colorado, Amanda Weekly Scott from Virginia. Competing in room 251AB will be Erin Jones from Florida, Victoria Lee from North Carolina, Matthew McClanahan from Tennessee, Beth Burnett from Michigan. And competing in room 251DE will be Catherine Brown from Ohio, Nicole Erbach from Arkansas, Andy Paul from Georgia, and Kylie Wheeler from Indiana. Yay, okay. The question for the Sweet 16 round is, production agriculture requires a lot of capital. Young farmers and ranchers face challenges gaining access to the capital they need to start or grow their operations. What tools are currently available and what new programs could be introduced to help young people access financial resources and make sound financial decisions to run their farms and ranches? Thank you again to all of our competitors, judges, and timekeepers, and congratulations to our Sweet 16 competitors, and I will now turn the stage over to Jonathan.
Thank you, Heather. We had an excellent day today with our Achievement Award competitors who were able to take part in our competition learning sessions. A huge thank you to Farm Credit for their continued sponsorship of that event. Let's give them a round of applause. Before we announce the Achievement Award Top 10, I would like to extend a special invitation to all YF&R members to join us in Omaha, Nebraska, March 8th through 11th for the 2024 YF&R Leadership Conference. Registration is now open, and all members can learn more by visiting fb.org/events. We have a great schedule planned, including a keynote speaker from AFBF President Zippy Duvall, and an evening at the newly opened Cuet Luminarium. We hope to see you there as we strive to grow leaders in the heartland. I'm excited to announce those competitors who will be taking part in the Achievement Award Top 10 interviews tomorrow morning. Those making the top 10 are requested to meet me at the front of the stage immediately following this announcement. We will move from the stage to our competitor orientation, which will be held in 255B here at the Salt Lake Palace Convention Center. The first interview will begin tomorrow morning promptly at 11 a.m. As always, the interviews are closed to the public. Competitors need to report to the holding room 30 minutes prior to their interview. Again, all contestants making it to the top 10, please make your way to the front as your name is called. In no particular order, here are your top 10 Achievement Award participants. Jacob Samuel from California. Clay and Alyssa Abbott from Illinois. Daniel and Megan Roberts from Minnesota. Brady and Anna Peak from Alabama. Ryan and Andrea Brown from Pennsylvania. Matt and Molly Adams from Kentucky. John David and Emily Peterson from Florida. Mitch and Brandy Klein from Michigan. Mark and Jessica Winning from Indiana. Adam and Carrie Barnhart from North Carolina. Congratulations to all competitors and good luck in the remainder of your competition.